Hey everybody, uh, this is my first time speaking directly to you. I have made a few of these videos for my other class. Hopefully my technological glitches or technological ineptitude is slightly less than it was before. So I will make some of these videos for you um, in place of the lectures, and if I find other material out there that does it better than me, which is entirely possible, I will give you those as well. I wanted to finish this section. We started talking about biological races, these kind of myths and realities, myths that are biological that you can separate humans into neat, discrete categories based on biology. But there are the realities of the social realities in which, regardless of whether there's any biological basis, individuals and groups of people are classified by socially constructed races, and this has implications for everything, whether you can get a job, whether you can find a place to live, all of these kind of issues. So it is both a myth and a reality. The section that I did not get to was on skin color, and the reason I wanted to talk about skin color is not because, biologically speaking, there's a lot of difference in terms of like genetic differences between humans that are based on skin color. Our genetic differences, and there are some, are pretty small compared to the other genetic differences that are less visible, like differences in blood proteins and that sort of thing. But skin color historically has been perceived as being one of the major factors that separates humans into different groups. So I wanted to talk about why humans have different skin colors, because even though we can't create nice, neat categories of people based on skin color, so for instance, we can't create a clear category of everyone who has dark skin is in one group, and then say medium is in another group, and then light is in a third group, and that we can see clearly the difference between who is dark, who is medium, who is light. As you know, that this is just kind of fades from the darkest skins to the lightest, with no clear boundaries between where one group stops and the other group starts. So while we do have variation in skin color, we certainly don't have anything that's like clearly bounded categories, like with no difference between, with no, in between. We have lots of in between. We have nothing but in between. So I still wanted to explain to you though, why does skin color vary from person to person? First of all, what is a physical trait called? A physical trait, hopefully you remember this word, is your phenotype. Those are your physical traits. So I always think of pH like physical. And that's different from your genotype, which is the genes you have. And remember, sometimes you can have genes that aren't in your phenotype. Like if you have A-type blood, but the two alleles you have are A and O. This O is not part of your phenotype, but it is part of your genotype. Okay, so what causes skin color to vary? Well, first of all, I just wanted to look at skin here up close. This is a piece of skin. And you can see that there are several layers here. And you can see that this is the sun. The sun can penetrate at different levels, sometimes all the way down to what we call this is yellow areas, like fatty subcutaneous. It's not even considered to be skin, but there's a lot of blood vessels in there and other tissues just beneath it. And some UV rays can go all the way through your skin entirely. But one of the things that you have to protect your skin from this UV radiation, natural factors that you have, is in this very top layer here. This is actually the epidermis, both this dark, I don't know what to call that, beigeish color and the blue layer underneath it are both part of the epidermis. The more beige portion is dead skin. So you may already know this. You're very, very, very top. It's thinner than even a piece of paper. That layer is dead cells in everyone. And then the blue cells underneath here are supposed to be the living cells. So you do have living cells, and you're constantly making new ones, because once you shed these dead skin layers, then you need something to replace it, or you wouldn't have any epidermis left. But if you look inside the living cells in this blue part here and you zoom in, what you'll see is we have these cells scattered here and there. It's the brownish one right here. And that cell is called a melanocyte. And so I'll spell it big here in case you can't see it. Melanocyte. And this last part means cell. We see that word a lot, referring to different types of cells. And melanocytes make this pigment called melanin. And melanin is what gives skin a brownish color. More melanin, more brown. Less melanin, less brown. Other things will affect your skin color, like blood. If you have either very light or kind of thin layers of skin, you can sometimes see like a reddish tone. That's from your blood pigments. But melanin is the primary determiner of differences in skin color between people. So what determines, well, by the way, everyone has the same, oops, there, I already had a technological glitch. Forgot to do something. Okay. Everyone has the same number of melanocytes. So same number of cells in pretty much everybody has the same number. What differs, and that is an A, I apologize. What's different is different amounts of the pigment are produced. So the cell might produce just a little bit of pigment, and I'm running off the screen, sorry. And some cells might produce a lot of pigment. So why does it vary how much melanin your melanocytes produce? Well, both, oops, my apologies. There we go. I'm going to get better at this. Genetics. Some people have genes that cause their cells to produce lots of melanin. Melanin's a protein, so, there's DNA in there for that particular melanin protein. And there's also like regulatory genes that tell the cell how much melanin to make. So some people have regulatory genes that say make lots of melanin, and other people have genes that say just make a little bit. Environmental factors also matter quite a bit in how much melanin you produce, and this is what we would call a suntan. Sunburn would be when you didn't produce enough melanin in time to protect you. So melanin, this pigment, should back up a little bit, can literally protect the cells like a shield from UV radiation. And when you get a suntan, it's your body's way of trying to protect itself. It's like, oh, we have a stressor, we have danger coming in, so we should protect ourselves. And that's what a suntan is. Okay, so adaptation to solar radiation levels. First, I want to talk about this word, adaptation. This just means some change or some trait that's best suited to a particular environment. So best suited depends on the environment, and the environment in this case is solar radiation levels. Some places have low solar radiation, some places have high solar radiation. Depends on where you are on the planet. It depends on how close you are to the equator, and sometimes it depends on, are you in a heavily forested area or an open area? But for the most part, it depends on how close you are to the equator. We'll see if I can in any way accurately draw where the equator would be. Let me get close. Like right about there. They get the most sun. As you go farther north or south, less sun, both in terms of like seasonality, because we have times of the year in farther north climates where you don't get much sun. And it's also the angle of the sun. In the equator, I've been in equatorial regions, it is directly above you. Whereas, in the winter especially, it's really low angle. In the farther, north you go. I don't talk as much about south because if you look at the pattern, most of the land mass in the world is in the northern versus some southern hemisphere. So there's just been more people in the north than there has been in the south historically. And it's not to say there aren't people down here though. Of course, there's some people that live all the way down to the tip at Terra del Fuego. The Cape Agulhas is actually the lowest cape, and in Australia. But what you can see here is there is a pattern. The closer you are to the equator, the more likely you are to have darker skin. The farther you are away, especially into the north, where humans really populated the north hemisphere first, you see that you get lighter and lighter skin. And this is based on, well, and it's assumption of people who have ancestors that have lived there for thousands of years. And we've talked about this. That can be problematic. Are we 100% sure that somebody's descended from people who have lived there for thousands of years? We are not 100% sure, but in some cases we're pretty sure. But what you'll see here is, and I actually took this image in Photoshop and attempted to smear it because they had exact lines here, and I just went and tried to smudge everything a little bit because the reality is this graph isn't even really showing that well. Is that there's this fade, as you go here, and occasionally you'll have individuals here with a little bit lighter skin. Occasionally you'll have people up here with a little bit darker. So it's not like everybody up here has super light skin and everybody here has super dark skin. There's a little variation within this population and within this population too. But in general, on average, you're going to see a slow fade, especially as you head up north, because as you head south, there's just less landmass and not as frequently colonized in the past. Okay. So what does high UV radiation do that is bad? So this is really important because, I should back up just for a second. When we talk about adaptation can mean both, it can mean both, see, I'm not technologically savvy yet. Adaptation can mean both what's best for the environment. Oh, I went all the way back there. What's best for the environment, but also how to avoid the worst. So avoid the worst and get the best. And in the case of solar radiation, it really is about avoiding the worst. So you have adaptations to deal with this problem, which is like, it's a stressor. It's something that is bad, a stressor or something bad. And to adapt, and the stressors, the bad things, are, skin cancer. You've all heard that high UV radiation will cause skin cancer. And this is really important, but from an evolutionary perspective that we'll get into after the next exam, it's not that important because most people don't develop skin cancer until after they have babies. If you've had babies, you've passed on your genes. Your genes are living in the population. They're continuing to move and to progress forward, I guess, in time. Whereas if you have something, a stressor that kills you before you have babies, then your genes don't get passed on. They're not part of the evolutionary gene pool in the future. So skin cancer is important, but the thing that we think is really important is breakdown of folate. Folate is a type of B vitamin. It's also referred to as folic acid. Fine if you just know folate. And yeah, you get it in various foods. It's great for you. And it is really critical to pregnant women because their baby needs it while the baby is developing. If they have a lack of it, if they don't have enough folate, they can have things like spina bifida. So spina bifida is just incomplete development of the spine, the bony spine, and also the spinal cord underneath it. And in a little baby, it usually looks like a lump. Usually it's low down in their lower back, but if it's bad enough, it can spread all the way up. And sometimes the brain and the skull don't develop properly. And this is a close-up version of it. And basically, instead of having these, bony spikes, and you can feel these if you just, run your hand down the center of your back, you'll feel all these bony spikes and they're protecting your spinal cord. In this case, those bony spikes never developed. The spinal cord never really formed completely, and then you have this sac filled with fluid, and the spinal cord is fully exposed. Usually, individuals are paralyzed or have very limited, control of their muscles and limited sensation in their lower body. And sometimes this can be fatal, or they can die early. If it's bad enough, if this split is higher up, then the baby might not live at all. So the baby needs adequate folic acid to. Folic acid prevents spina bifida. It prevents all of these kind of developmental problems associated with spinal cord. So you have to have enough folic acid when you're pregnant so your baby doesn't get spina bifida. Well, the problem is UV radiation will break down the folate vitamin in your bloodstream. The UV radiation, the UVA, can penetrate all the way through your skin and all the way into your blood vessels. And in your blood vessels, you have that folic acid, or that B vitamin is, cruising through. The B, again, is a B vitamin. You have, there's several numbers of B vitamins, one of which is folic acid. And it's going through the bloodstream because you ate it in some food that you ate. had folic acid, and that's great. You have this nutrient running through your bloodstream. Well, the UV radiation can literally break it down. So, like literally destroy the folic acid so you no longer have that nutrient. And if you're pregnant, that means your baby is not going to get that nutrient. So, really bad. And it can cause this problem if that folate in your bloodstream gets broken down. So if you're living in an environment with high UV radiation, so you are living close to the equator. And again, I'm going to draw my not so great equator. Okay. So if you're living anywhere close, and particularly in mainland Africa, though Australians, because they have such an open environment, they also get a lot of sun as well. Well, anyway, if you're living in this area, you're getting high UV. So this is super high UV right along here and in this open environment here. So high UV means you're at a high risk of breakdown of folate in your blood, and that means you will not have healthy babies. So in order to protect you, it is, both these look like the same letter, don't they? That's supposed to be UV, not UU. In both of these areas, what you'll find is dark skin to protect those individuals, those moms really, from breakdown of folate. So their babies are going to be born with normal spines. That's great. They need dark skin color close to the equator. But what about light skin? Why do we then have light skin up here? They don't have a problem with spina bifida. But humans probably evolved somewhere in here, maybe down in here. First groups of humans, like maybe 200,000 years ago. And then those humans, their population expanded and they moved all over the place. And eventually, they moved. And actually, this is how they got to the Americas, probably was from over here. They kept moving and moving as time went on. So we probably originally, the earliest humans had really dark skin. All the fossil evidence says we evolved here. Very first humans, this is why they had dark skin. But why is it that some people, when they moved up north, because we moved north first as humans, why did they evolve light skin? They faced another possible vitamin deficiency, and that specifically is vitamin D deficiency. So, interesting fact, UV radiation stimulates the production of vitamin D naturally. You don't even have to eat vitamin D. There's a precursor molecule in your skin and eventually converted by your liver. I don't care that you know really anything about all these chemical reactions and steps that eventually turn into active vitamin D. What I want you to know is that the beginning of the process is UV radiation. And UV radiation ultimately results in vitamin D, which you need. So, if you don't have enough, if you have low UV radiation, then you're not going to have enough vitamin D. You're going to have low vitamin D. Well, one of the things that it can cause is this disorder called rickets. Rickets is where you see this. You see this is an x-ray of this individual here. This person is not just intentionally standing that way. It's because their hip bones their thigh bones in particular are really curved, but so are their shin bones. So in a normal person without this condition, you'd see this is the ball and socket joint of your hip, and then your bone kind of comes out and goes actually it angles inward a little bit, but I didn't even draw it straight enough. That would be part of your knee down here. There's your bone. It should be pretty straight and come like that. And then the one beneath it that makes your knee should come down pretty straight like that. And this individual has some serious curvature. And that's because vitamin D, it helps your intestines absorb calcium. And as most of you have probably heard of, you need calcium when you're growing up to have strong bones. And this individual didn't have enough calcium because this individual did not have enough vitamin D. And low UV radiation, you don't produce enough vitamin D, you don't absorb enough calcium. So yeah, lack of calcium, lack of vitamin D from the sun means lack of calcium. And then you ultimately have it's really soft bones. that just collapse. This was actually common during the beginning of the industrial age when kids started working in factories all the time instead of working out on the farm and being out in the sun. So you'd see a lot of cases of this. And what happened is then agricultural industries started adding vitamin D to milk. So now you can just drink milk because they figured, well, it pairs with calcium. So there are other sources of vitamin D out there that aren't as common. And we have some other, quote, artificial sources in which vitamin D has been added. So that's how we get around this problem now. And that means somebody with dark skin can easily live in the north because it's easy to get vitamin D through other sources besides UV radiation. So again, this is not such a problem, this low UV radiation and low vitamin D in the modern age, because now we have some sort of supplements. So people with dark skin can easily live in places with low UV and still have enough vitamin D. Okay, so here's the take-home message, is that if you live in an environment with high UV, that's your environment. In order to, and that would be close to the equator, in order to adapt well, dark skin is going to be advantageous. So dark skin is your adaptation. And it's really, adaptation again can be avoiding the worst. And that is because you will get adequate folate. Because it won't be broken down by UV, because the dark skin protects you. So dark skin means you get enough folate, which means this word fitness we haven't introduced yet, so don't worry about it. But it just means you have lots of healthy babies. These healthy babies, darker skinned babies, are going to be more common in this environment. Conversely, if you have light skin in this environment in a high UV, you're going to have low folate. You're going to have breakdown of folate. And some of your babies might be okay, but a lot of them are not. They're going to have some problem with their spine. They're not going to survive. So light skin ultimately is not going to survive in that environment. So contrast that with a low UV environment, which would be, in the case of human, prehistory would have been moving up into the northern latitudes. Light skin is going to allow you to have adequate vitamin D. You already have adequate folate because the sun's not breaking it down. You don't get enough UV, so that's not a problem. And if you get adequate vitamin D, you're going to have a bunch of healthy babies. So that's an adaptation. Now, conversely, if you have dark skin and you live in an area with low UV, before the age of supplements of vitamin D, you are not going to have enough vitamin D. It's going to be low. Folate's not going to be a problem. It's not a problem in the northern latitudes. And low vitamin D is going to result in babies that maybe have soft bones. And so they're not going to be as likely to survive. So you're going to see lighter skinned people more commonly in those northern latitudes. Okay, so this is a really interesting kind of exception, for a good reason, to this pattern. These two individuals are Inuit, and Inuit live in far north, what today would be Canada. They have low UV radiation. And yet their skin color, it's not really, really dark, but many of them have much darker skin than you would predict, given the extremely, like I almost have to put two arrows, super low UV. There's times of the year when they don't see the sun for several months. And when they do see the sun in their summer, it is still at a really low angle that far north, so they don't get a lot of direct UV at all. So their cultural adaptation is a little bit different. They don't add vitamin D to milk. They don't traditionally drink milk. Instead, it has to do with fish oil. So they hunt, eat fish all the time. That has been part of their diet since we don't even know, thousands and thousands of years. Fish oil has high vitamin D. They don't need to get it from the sun. They get it from their diet. So there are natural sources of vitamin D in various foods, but those foods aren't found everywhere in the world. If you don't live next to the coast, you're not going to get fish oil. traditionally speaking, before we had, this massive industrialized agriculture and trade that we have now. Um, as a hunter-gatherer, you're going to eat what's close by. So they ate a lot of fish. They got around the problem of low vitamin D in low UV environments. They're getting their vitamin D from elsewhere, so their skin color doesn't need to be light. So they never evolved lighter skin. Okay, so I'm going to cut it off there. I do have a few more slides. I might add an extra video because I think it's interesting. I think it's more important for people that might be doing a case study project on race, myth, and realities. So I will make that, but that will be an optional video. Thank you all. Take care.